my underwriting process, over the last 2 years I've been in this, I'm working on streamlining it. I'm not as streamlined as Chris, but I'm probably somewhere in the middle and trying to trend towards him. And the first thing I'm going to look at is where is it located? Like based off of Nick's presentation and my facilities I own, if it's somewhere I'm going to be or like to go, I do put weight on that. Is there a number? No. And I'm looking at the occupancy, like I mentioned earlier, of the subject facilities. How am I going to have to compete? If everyone's 80% full or 60% full, if they're doing a lot of marketing, a lot of Google ads, how's that going to affect me? Like I'm just kind of getting a meter. Like after you look at it, when I used to do houses, I used to tell everybody when they were like, well, how do you know? I'm like, you just need to, somebody said it yesterday, you need to put in reps. You need to look at deals, you need to get a feel, and then that analyzation becomes like instinctual. And it's like hard to relay to other people.
What did you do?
It's Ben's fault. So like, when I'm like, oh, I look at this and I feel like this, there's no number that goes along with it. It's a feeling that the more you get in this business, and what I'm saying is just do it. Look at people's deals. Look at Ian's deals. Look at this deal when you get home and say, okay, well, now after this exercise, maybe I'll assign a little more weight or take a little more risk here.
Terry needs a new beach house. Go on. Right, Casey?
But Ian's making a joke. So the guys that are in here from Baltimore, like we used to do 80 to 100 wholesale single family deals a year. And after a while, there was just this feel, okay, boom, I know I can do this. I didn't know the exact numbers, but it was just calculated. And Ian did the same thing, right? He busted my chops because he would pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars after years of wholesale fees.
But I was doing the same thing on the other side. I was like, yo, it feels right, keep it moving.
You were doing the same thing because you had that instinct of, yo, we can add this in our portfolio, plug it in, and it was actually compressing your expenses and stuff the same way Nick's doing that on his portfolio.
Yep.
So, like I said earlier, quickly call around the competitors, not get too deep in the numbers, but try to get like that, what I think that base 10 by 10 rate is, and plug it right in. You have my sheet, which we'll like briefly go through, and I know it looks like, I plugged 4 numbers in that sheet, and we'll go through in a second, but just to get a feel for like the range of where it could go to help me kind of know what the where the property could end up. So I actually asked John for the property. I kind of briefly looked at it, and I like went through the analysis that you guys did like I would a normal property. I said, okay, and came up with a lot of the same numbers that you actually came up with. I was like, okay, well, I think worst case conservatively, I could get this to 80 cents, but probably 90. I just plug in the expense ratio. I don't figure it out. I plug in 35% because that's what all the big boys are paying. They're not going off what your expenses are if they're buying. So if I'm calculating my exit cap rate, I'm going to calculate it off what they're going to buy it at. And then I factor in 10% vacancy. If it's a small facility, which this one isn't, if it's sub 12,000, I'm probably plugging in 40 or 45% because I have a 10,000 square foot facility and that's what the expenses are. And when I went through my refi recently, I was kind of like I'd never looked. That you were joking that I don't pressure test my deals. Like that kind of made me start going back and looking at what the true numbers are. Like I get cash flow and I like the property, but when I break it down, I'm like, damn, almost half the money is going to expenses. And that starts to look at like hedging your portfolio, which is another conversation. So typically, historically, when I would run my pro forma, I'd run this and I'd calculate the equity and the cash flow and I'd want my ROI based on my exit year, whether that's between year 2 and 4, to be 20 to 30%, was kind of what I wanted to hit. And that's just based off where my first deal was and where those numbers were. And I was like, okay, well, this deal worked out really well. This is kind of where I want to be. And I also didn't factor in, I know John had I don't factor in parking unless there's structures because it's not really a tangible asset that you can't calculate it at the same cap rate. Pros aren't going to give you a 6 cap for parking if they're paying a 6. They shouldn't. The same thing, and I forget who it was. Somebody said this, like U-Haul and all that. Like those shouldn't be calculated at the same cap rate because you don't have full control over. You don't really have an asset. I guess your gravel parking lot's an asset, but it's not like a tangible structure. So I just calculated it out and added it in as like buffer.
You look about like fees or insurance.
I do not calculate that in. That's something I kind of want to, but that's where I start to like push it and I say, okay, well, I'm not factoring this in. So if my numbers are tight and it's an area I want to be, it's near my portfolio, I'll maybe take that risk and know that my numbers probably will come out higher.